The gunshot echoed through the valley as Vance McCoy dropped to one knee, his hand pressing against the bleeding wound in his shoulder. Cursing under his breath, he watched the bandit disappear into the scrubby hills of eastern Wyoming Territory. It was 1875, and this was the third raid on his cattle in as many months. Grimacing, he mounted his horse and headed back to his ranch outside Riverton, knowing his children would be waiting and that he had no good answers for them about the future of their home. The wound wasn't deep, but it throbbed with a steady, insistent pulse as Vance guided his horse down the familiar trail. At 34, he felt twice that age. The last 3 years since Mariah's death had worn him down to something hollow, something barely resembling the man he'd once been. 2 young children, Elizabeth, age 7, and Thomas, age 5, depended on him, yet he could barely look them in the eye most days. Smoke curled from the chimney of his modest ranch house as he approached. Sarah, the elderly woman who helped with the children, would have dinner ready. His ranch hand, Jeremiah, stepped out of the barn as Vance rode in. "Mr. McCoy, you're bleeding." Jeremiah hurried forward. Vance dismounted with a wince. "Just a graze, lost 3 more cattle today. Those raiders are getting bolder." "Let me help you inside, sir." Vance waved him off. "See to the horse, I can manage." He stumbled slightly as he walked toward the house, his boots heavy with dust and weariness. Inside, the scent of stew filled the air. His children looked up from the table, their faces brightening momentarily before Elizabeth noticed the blood. "Papa, you're hurt." She jumped from her chair. "It's nothing, Lizzie, just a scratch." Vance forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Sarah bustled over, her gray hair escaping from its bun. "Nothing," he says. "Sit down before you fall down, Vance McCoy. I'll get the medicine box." As Sarah cleaned the wound, Vance watched his children watching him. Thomas's lower lip trembled while Elizabeth sat straight-backed, trying to be brave. They'd seen too much for their young years, their mother's long illness, her death, and now their father's slow dissolution into a shadow of himself. He felt a familiar shame creep up his spine. These children deserved better. "You'll need stitches," Sarah pronounced. "I'll do my best, but you really should ride into town tomorrow and see Dr. Phillips." Vance nodded absently. "Any mail come today?" Sarah's expression tightened. "Another notice from the bank. I put it on your desk." Later that night, after the children were in bed and Sarah had gone to her small room at the back of the house, Vance sat at his desk staring at the bank notice. The drought had hit his cattle hard, and the raiders were picking off what remained. 2 more months, and he'd lose everything: the ranch, his children's inheritance, the last connection to Mariah. He opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a bottle of whiskey, not bothering with a glass. The amber liquid burned down his throat, a familiar fire that did nothing to warm the cold emptiness inside him. "What am I supposed to do, Mariah?" he whispered to the empty room. No answer came, just as none had come in the 3 years he'd been asking. The next morning, Vance rode into Riverton with a pounding head and a shoulder that felt like it was on fire. The town had grown considerably in the 5 years since he'd settled in the territory. What had once been little more than a trading post now boasted several streets of businesses, a small hotel, 3 saloons, and a newly built schoolhouse. Dr. Phillips confirmed what Vance already knew: the wound wasn't life-threatening, but he'd need rest to avoid infection. Rest was a luxury Vance couldn't afford. After leaving the doctor's office, he headed to the bank, dreading the conversation ahead. Herbert Wilson, the bank manager, was waiting for him. "Mr. McCoy, please come in." Wilson's forced smile didn't reach his eyes. "I see you received our notice." "I need more time, Wilson, just until the fall drive. The cattle are starting to recover," and Wilson raised a hand. "Mr. McCoy, you've been saying the same thing for 6 months now." "The bank has been more than accommodating, but I'm afraid." The door to the bank opened, and both men turned to look. A young woman entered, dressed in a simple but well-made dark blue dress. Her honey-brown hair was pulled back neatly under a modest bonnet, and she carried herself with quiet confidence. Vance didn't recognize her, which meant she must be new to Riverton. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying a slight Eastern accent. "I'm looking for Mr. Wilson." Wilson stood. "Miss Blackburn, we weren't expecting you until tomorrow." He turned to Vance. "Mr. McCoy, we'll need to continue this discussion another time. Miss Blackburn is our new schoolteacher." Vance nodded curtly and rose to leave, wincing as the movement pulled at his stitches. The woman Miss Blackburn noticed. "Are you all right, sir?" she asked, her brow creasing with concern. "Fine," Vance replied shortly, not meeting her eyes. He tipped his hat and left without another word, feeling Wilson's relief and the woman's curious gaze following him out. Faith Blackburn watched the tall, brooding man exit the bank. There was something in the set of his shoulders that spoke of more than physical pain. "I apologize for the interruption," she said, turning back to Mr. Wilson. "Not at all. We're delighted to have you arrive safely, Miss Blackburn." The journey from Boston must have been exhausting. "It was certainly an adventure," Faith replied with a smile, "but I'm eager to begin. The school term starts in 2 weeks, correct?" "Yes, and the children are quite excited. We haven't had a proper teacher since Miss Jenkins left last winter." "Your credentials are most impressive." Faith nodded politely as Wilson continued to speak about the school and the town, but her mind kept returning to the wounded rancher. There had been such desolation in his brief glance, like a man who had given up but didn't know how to stop fighting. Later that afternoon, Faith was getting settled in the small house provided for the town's teacher when there was a knock at the door. She opened it to find an older woman with a kind face, accompanied by 2 children, a girl with serious eyes and a younger boy who partially hid behind the woman's skirts. "Miss Blackburn, I'm Sarah Winters. I help look after the McCoy children." She gestured to the children. "This is Elizabeth and Thomas. They heard the new teacher had arrived and wanted to come introduce themselves." Faith smiled warmly. "How lovely to meet you both. Please come in. I was just about to make some tea." Elizabeth stepped forward, extending her hand formally. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Blackburn. Papa says good manners matter." "Your father is quite right," Faith replied, shaking the small hand. "And you must be Thomas," she added, kneeling to the boy's level. He nodded shyly but didn't speak. "Thomas doesn't talk much," Elizabeth explained matter-of-factly. "Not since Mama went to heaven." Faith's heart constricted at the simple statement. "I understand," she said gently. "Sometimes we don't have the words for big feelings." Sarah gave Faith an appreciative look as they moved inside. Over tea and the cookies Faith had fortuitously baked that morning, she learned more about the McCoys. Vance McCoy was the wounded man she'd seen at the bank, a widower struggling to keep his ranch afloat while raising 2 children alone. "Papa tries," Elizabeth said seriously, "but he's very sad inside." "Elizabeth," Sarah admonished gently. "It's all right," Faith assured her. "I lost my parents when I was not much older than Elizabeth. I understand that sadness can sometimes feel very big." "Do you have children, Miss Blackburn?" Thomas asked suddenly, his voice so quiet Faith almost missed it. Faith smiled, pleased to hear him speak. "No, I don't, but I've taught many children in Boston. That's a city far to the east." "Why did you come here?" Elizabeth asked. "Boston sounds important." "I wanted an adventure," Faith replied honestly, "and I believe that teaching children in places like Riverton is important work." After they left, Faith sat alone in her small parlor, thinking about the McCoy family. There was something about those children that tugged at her heart, perhaps because she recognized in them the same lost feeling she'd experienced after her own parents died of influenza when she was 12. Faith had been raised by her aunt afterward, a kind but deeply religious woman who had instilled in Faith both a love of learning and a profound faith. It was that faith that had carried her through the darkest times and ultimately led her to teaching. Now, as she prepared for bed in her new home, Faith found herself praying for the McCoy family, especially for the father whose eyes held such emptiness. The following Sunday, Faith attended services at Riverton's small church. As the newest member of the community, she found herself the center of attention, with many parents introducing themselves and their children. She was pleased to see Elizabeth and Thomas in the front pew beside Sarah, but noted that Vance McCoy was conspicuously absent. After the service, as she chatted with families outside the church, she spotted Elizabeth and Thomas waiting by a hitching post while Sarah spoke with the minister. "Good morning," Faith greeted them. "It's nice to see you both again." Elizabeth smiled. "Papa said we could invite you for Sunday dinner if you'd like to come. Sarah makes the best chicken." Faith was surprised by the invitation. "That's very kind, I'd be delighted." "Papa won't be there," Thomas added quietly. "He never comes to church. He says God doesn't listen to men like him." Elizabeth elbowed her brother. "We're not supposed to tell people that." Faith kept her expression neutral despite her concern at Thomas's words. "Well, I would still be happy to join you for dinner." Sarah rejoined them, looking pleased when they told her about the invitation. "Mr. McCoy did mention you might be alone in town, not knowing many people yet. The ranch is just a few miles out. You could ride with us in the wagon if you'd like." The McCoy ranch was modest but well-built, with a main house, barn, bunkhouse, and several corrals. As they approached, Faith saw Vance McCoy in one of the corrals, working with a horse. He looked up at the sound of the wagon, his expression unreadable. "Papa," Thomas called, jumping down from the wagon before it had fully stopped. "Miss Blackburn came for dinner." Vance removed his hat and wiped his brow, nodding to Faith as she descended from the wagon with Sarah's help. "Miss Blackburn, welcome to our home." "Thank you for the invitation, Mr. McCoy. You have a lovely place." He looked around as if seeing it through her eyes. It's seen better days. "Papa's horse is the fastest in the territory," Thomas announced proudly. The most animated Faith had seen him. Vance's expression softened as he looked at his son. "Thunderbolt's getting old now, just like your pa. Why don't you show Miss Blackburn the new foal while Sarah and I get cleaned up for dinner?" Thomas eagerly took Faith's hand and led her toward the barn, Elizabeth following close behind. The foal was indeed worth seeing, a glossy black with a white star on its forehead. As the children excitedly told her about the horses, Faith noticed their animation and wondered how often they had visitors to share their enthusiasms with. Dinner was pleasant, if somewhat strained. Vance McCoy was polite but distant, answering Faith's questions about the ranch and the area with brief responses. It was clear he was making an effort for his children's sake. "Miss Blackburn used to teach in Boston," Elizabeth informed her father. "That's even farther than Cheyenne." "Is that so?" Vance looked at Faith with mild interest. "What brings a Boston lady to Wyoming Territory?" "The adventure, partly," Faith replied honestly. "But also the opportunity. There's important work to be done out here, teaching reading and figures." There was a hint of skepticism in his voice. "Teaching children to think for themselves," Faith corrected gently. "To question, to wonder, to find their place in the world. That's as important here as it is in Boston, perhaps more so." Something flickered in Vance's eyes. "Respect, perhaps. You sound passionate about it." "I am. Every child deserves a chance to learn, no matter where they're born." After dinner, the children proudly showed Faith their small rooms. Thomas had a collection of carved wooden animals his father had made, while Elizabeth treasured a book of fairy tales that had belonged to their mother. "Mama used to read to us every night," Elizabeth said, running her fingers over the worn cover. "Papa tried after she died, but it made him too sad." Faith's heart ached for them. "Would you like me to read a story before I go?" Both children nodded eagerly. As Faith read about princesses and dragons, she was acutely aware of Vance standing in the doorway, watching silently. When she finished, Elizabeth asked for one more, but Faith noticed Thomas's eyelids drooping. "I think it's bedtime," she said gently, "but perhaps another time." "Will you say prayers with us?" Elizabeth asked. "Sarah always does, but she has a headache tonight." Faith nodded. "Of course." She knelt beside the beds as the children clasped their hands. Elizabeth led with the familiar, "Now I lay me down to sleep," while Thomas whispered along. Then, to Faith's surprise, Elizabeth continued, "And please God, help Papa find his smile again, and keep the bad men away from our cows, and thank you for sending Miss Blackburn to teach us. Amen." "Amen," Faith echoed softly, her throat tight. She kissed each child on the forehead and turned to find Vance gone from the doorway. She found him on the porch, staring out at the darkening landscape. The sunset painted the distant mountains purple and gold, a breathtaking sight. "Your children are wonderful, Mr. McCoy," she said, joining him at the rail. He nodded without looking at her. "They deserve better than what I can give them. They love you very much." "Love isn't always enough, Miss Blackburn," he sighed, finally turning to face her. "Thank you for reading to them, and for the prayers. I'm not much use in that department." Faith considered her words carefully. Faith can be difficult to hold on to in hard times. A bitter smile crossed his face. "Is that what they call it in Boston? Here we just call it life." "The name doesn't matter much," Faith replied. "The comfort it provides does." Vance studied her face in the fading light. "You really believe all that God is watching over us, that he cares?" "I do. Even when I can't feel his presence, I believe he's there." Vance shook his head. I've seen too much to believe in a merciful God, Miss Blackburn, lost too much. I understand that feeling. When he looked skeptical, she continued, I lost both my parents when I was 12. There were days I was so angry at God I could barely breathe. Surprise flickered across his face. I'm sorry for your loss, as I am for yours. Faith paused. Your daughter prays for you to find your smile again. Something raw crossed his features. Elizabeth has her mother's heart, too good for this world. Too good to give up on, Faith corrected gently. Their eyes met for a long moment before Sarah came out to announce the wagon was ready to take Faith back to town. Over the next 2 weeks, as Faith prepared for the school term, she found herself thinking often about the McCoy family. She saw Elizabeth and Thomas at church again the following Sunday, and they proudly introduced her to several other children who would be her students. The day before school began, Faith was surprised to see Vance McCoy in town, loading supplies into his wagon. She had just finished arranging her classroom and was heading to the general store. Mr. McCoy, she greeted him. How are you? He nodded politely. Miss Blackburn, the children are looking forward to school tomorrow. I'm looking forward to having them. Elizabeth tells me Thomas is quite good with numbers. Pride briefly softened Vance's stern features. Takes after his mother, she could calculate figures faster than any man I've known. She sounds like a remarkable woman. She was. The familiar shadow crossed his face. Better than I deserved. Before Faith could respond, a commotion erupted down the street. A group of rough-looking men on horseback thundered into town, shouting and firing pistols into the air. Townspeople scrambled to get out of their way. Damn it, Vance muttered. Those are the same men who have been raiding my cattle. Without thinking, Faith stepped closer to Vance as the riders approached. One man with a bushy red beard and cold eyes spotted Vance and slowed his horse. Well, if it ain't McCoy, he sneered. How's that shoulder healing up? Vance's face hardened. Better enough to put a bullet in you if you come near my property again, Sutter. The man called Sutter laughed. Big talk from a man about to lose his ranch. His gaze shifted to Faith and something predatory entered his expression. Who's your pretty friend? Miss Blackburn is our new schoolteacher, Vance said firmly. And none of your concern. Schoolteacher, eh? Sutter's grin widened. Maybe I'll come get educated sometime. Faith felt Vance tense beside her. I think you'd find my lessons too challenging, Mr. Sutter, she said calmly. They require a basic level of intelligence. Sutter's face darkened, but before he could respond, the town marshal approached, hand resting on his pistol. You boys causing trouble? Marshal Davis asked. Just passing through, Marshal, Sutter replied, his tone falsely innocent. Heading to the saloon for a friendly drink. See, that's all you do. We don't want any trouble in Riverton. Sutter tipped his hat mockingly and rode on, his companions following. As they headed toward the saloon, Sutter looked back at Vance with unmistakable malice. You shouldn't have done that, Vance said quietly to Faith. Sutter's not a man to cross. I won't be intimidated by bullies, Mr. McCoy. Faith met his gaze steadily, and neither should you. It's not about intimidation, it's about keeping people safe. There was genuine concern in his voice. Sutter and his gang don't care who they hurt. Marshal Davis joined them. He's right, Miss Blackburn, those men are dangerous. They've been terrorizing ranches all through the territory. Why haven't they been arrested? Faith asked. No proof that would stand in court, the marshal explained. And they're careful not to cause too much trouble in town where witnesses might see. Vance's jaw tightened. They've stolen at least a dozen of my cattle, shot me, and threatened my ranch hand. How much more proof do you need? The marshal looked uncomfortable. You know how it is, McCoy, your word against theirs, and they've got connections with some powerful people in the territorial government. Vance cursed under his breath. Come on, Miss Blackburn, I'll walk you back to your house. It's not safe with Sutter and his men in town. Faith wanted to object but saw the genuine concern in both men's eyes. She allowed Vance to escort her home, his hand hovering protectively near her elbow. Thank you for seeing me home, she said when they reached her door. But I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself. A ghost of a smile touched Vance's lips. I don't doubt that, Miss Blackburn, but Sutter's not a threat to take lightly. Promise me you'll be careful. The genuine worry in his eyes touched her. I promise, and please call me Faith. Miss Blackburn makes me feel like I'm 100 years old. This time a real smile, however brief, crossed his face. Faith then, and I'm Vance. As he turned to leave, Faith called after him. Will you be bringing the children to school tomorrow? He paused. Sarah usually takes them into town. I'd like it if you could come, just for the first day. It means a lot to children to have their parents there. Something complicated passed across his features: pain, guilt, uncertainty. Finally, he nodded. I'll try. The next morning, the schoolhouse was filled with excited children and proud parents. Faith greeted each family warmly, learning names and making mental notes about each child. She was beginning to worry that the McCoys wouldn't come when the door opened one last time. Elizabeth and Thomas entered, followed by Vance. He'd clearly made an effort with his appearance. His clothes were clean, his hair neatly combed, and he'd shaved. But it was the look on the children's faces that caught Faith's attention. They positively beamed with pride at having their father there. "Welcome," Faith greeted them. "I'm so glad you could all make it." Elizabeth hugged Faith impulsively. "Papa came. He got up extra early to finish his chores so he could come with us." Faith met Vance's eyes over the child's head. That was very thoughtful of him. The first day of school went smoothly, with the 23 students ranging in age from 6 to 15 quickly warming to their new teacher. Faith noticed that while Thomas was indeed gifted with numbers, he rarely spoke aloud in class. Elizabeth, meanwhile, eagerly participated in everything. When the day ended, Faith was surprised to see Vance waiting outside with the wagon. Most of the town children walked home, while those from outlying farms and ranches usually traveled together with an older sibling or ranch hand. "I thought I'd give Sarah a break," he explained as the children ran to him. "That's very kind of you," Faith replied. "Would you like to come in for a moment? I wanted to discuss something about Thomas with you." While the children explored the small library shelf Faith had set up, she spoke quietly with Vance. "Thomas is exceptionally bright," she began, "particularly with mathematics, but he seems reluctant to speak in class." Vance nodded, his expression somber. "He hasn't been the same since Mariah died. He was only 2, but they were very close. He used to chatter constantly." "Grief affects children differently than adults," Faith said gently, "and sometimes they need different kinds of support." "I've tried," Vance said, a note of frustration in his voice. "God knows I've tried, but I don't know how to reach him." "You're here," Faith pointed out. "That matters more than you know." Vance looked at her for a long moment. "You're not what I expected from a Boston schoolteacher." "Is that a compliment, Mr. McCoy?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I believe it is, Miss Blackburn." As September gave way to October, Faith settled into life in Riverton. She threw herself into teaching, developing different approaches for each of her students. For Thomas, she created special mathematics problems that challenged him, praising his work privately rather than calling attention to him in front of the class. Gradually, he began to speak more, first in whispers to her, then in quiet responses to direct questions. Elizabeth flourished under Faith's guidance, her natural curiosity finding outlets in books and science experiments. She often stayed after school to help Faith clean the classroom, using the time to pepper her with questions about Boston, books, and life beyond Riverton. To Faith's surprise, Vance began picking the children up from school several days a week. These brief interactions gradually evolved into longer conversations. Faith learned about his journey west from Missouri after the war, his meeting Mariah when her wagon train stopped near his camp, their whirlwind courtship, and their dreams of building a ranch together. In turn, she told him about her childhood in Boston, losing her parents and her aunt who raised her. "Aunt Margaret was devout but never preaky," Faith explained one afternoon as they walked from the schoolhouse to her home, the children running ahead. "She taught me that faith was about love, not fear." "My mother was religious," Vance admitted. "Used to read from the Bible every night. I believed it all once." "What changed?" His expression darkened. "The war. Hard to believe in a loving God when you've seen what men can do to each other." "Then Mariah." He trailed off. "I can't imagine your pain," Faith said softly, "but I found that faith isn't about understanding God's plan. It's about finding the strength to continue when there seems to be no path forward." Vance looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You make it sound simple." "Oh, it's not simple at all," Faith said with a small smile, "but it can be a comfort even in the darkest times." They had reached her gate. The children were already on her small porch examining a pot of late blooming flowers. "Would you like to stay for dinner?" Faith found herself asking, "It's not much, just a stew, but there's plenty." Surprise flickered across Vance's face, followed by something that might have been pleasure. "I wouldn't want to impose. It's not an imposition, I enjoy the company," she smiled. "Besides, I've been told my biscuits are almost as good as Sarah's." "That's a bold claim," Vance said, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. "I suppose we'll have to test it." That evening marked a shift in their relationship. The conversation flowed more easily, with even Thomas joining in to tell Faith about the new calf born the previous day. Vance seemed more relaxed than Faith had ever seen him, actually laughing when Elizabeth recounted a mishap with a frog she'd tried to bring to school. As they were preparing to leave, Elizabeth asked, "Can Miss Faith come to dinner at our house on Sunday? Sarah's visiting her sister in Cheyenne." Vance looked momentarily caught off guard. "I'm sure Miss Blackburn has other plans, Lizzie." "Actually, I don't," Faith said. "I'd be delighted to come if that's all right with you." After a moment's hesitation, Vance nodded. "We'd be honored to have you." Sunday dinner at the McCoy Ranch became a regular occurrence over the following weeks. Faith discovered that Vance was actually a decent cook, though he claimed to know only a few simple dishes. The children clearly delighted in these visits, and Faith found herself looking forward to them more than she cared to admit. One Sunday in late October, as Faith helped clear the dinner dishes, Elizabeth said, "Miss Faith, would you teach Papa to pray again? He's forgotten how." Faith nearly dropped the plate she was holding. "Elizabeth, it's all right," Vance interrupted, his voice tight. "Elizabeth, that's not something you ask of guests." "But Mama would want you to pray again," Elizabeth insisted. "She always said prayers keep heaven close." An awkward silence fell. Thomas looked anxiously between his father and sister. "Why don't we go for a walk?" Faith suggested, hoping to ease the tension. "It's a beautiful afternoon." The suggestion worked. Soon they were strolling along a small creek that ran through the McCoy property, the children running ahead to throw sticks into the water. "I apologize for Elizabeth," Vance said when the children were out of earshot. "She doesn't understand. There's no need to apologize. She misses her mother and wants to honor her memory." Vance was quiet for a long moment, watching his children. Mariah was dying for nearly a year. Consumption. By the end, she could barely breathe, but she still said prayers with the children every night. His voice grew rough. "The night before she died, I heard her praying for me, asking God to help me find peace, to be the father our children needed. But when she was gone, I felt nothing but emptiness. What kind of God takes a woman like that and leaves someone like me behind?" The raw pain in his voice made Faith's chest ache. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I don't think anyone can know why some are taken and others remain. But I believe your wife's prayer was answered. You are the father your children need. You're here loving them, protecting them, doing the best you can." "It's not enough." Vance's voice was barely audible. "It is," Faith said firmly. "Love is always enough, even when it feels inadequate." They walked in silence for a while, the only sounds the children's laughter and the gentle gurgle of the creek. When they turned back toward the house, Vance suddenly said, "I haven't been inside a church since we buried Mariah. Can't bring myself to walk through those doors." "God isn't only found in churches," Faith said gently. "Where then?" There was genuine questioning in his voice. Faith gestured to the landscape around them, the golden cottonwoods along the creek, the vast blue sky, the distant mountains touched with the first snow. "Everywhere you look. In your children's laughter, in acts of kindness, in moments of beauty that take your breath away." Vance looked at her, really looked at her, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. Faith felt something shift between them, a recognition, a connection deeper than friendship. The moment was broken when Elizabeth called, "Papa, Miss Faith, look what Thomas found." They turned to see Thomas proudly holding up a perfect arrowhead, his face alight with excitement. "Well, would you look at that," Vance said, his voice warm with pride. "That's a fine find, son." Thomas beamed under his father's praise. "Can I show Miss Faith how to use my magnifying glass to look at it?" "Of course you can," Faith said, matching his enthusiasm. "I'd love to see it up close." Back at the house, Thomas carefully laid his treasure on the table and ran to fetch his prized magnifying glass, a gift from his grandfather. As he explained the markings to Faith with uncharacteristic animation, she caught Vance watching them, a look of wonder on his face. That night, as Vance drove Faith back to town in the wagon, a comfortable silence settled between them. The stars spread across the sky in breathtaking profusion, more than Faith had ever seen in Boston. "Thank you," Vance said suddenly. "For what?" "For being patient with us, with me." He kept his eyes on the road ahead. "I haven't been the easiest person to know these past years. Grief changes us," Faith said simply, "but it doesn't define us." As they reached her house, Vance helped her down from the wagon, his hand lingering on hers a moment longer than necessary. "Good night, Faith." "Good night, Vance." She watched him drive away, a strange mixture of emotions swirling within her. There was no denying it anymore. She was falling in love with Vance McCoy and his children. The realization both thrilled and terrified her. November brought colder weather and the first serious snowfall. School continued, with Faith introducing her students to Shakespeare, much to the consternation of some parents who thought it too highbrow for frontier children. But when the students performed scenes from A Midsummer Night's Dream at the Thanksgiving social, even the skeptics were won over. Elizabeth played Titania with dramatic flair, while Thomas, to everyone's surprise, took on the role of Puck, delivering his lines with unexpected confidence. Watching from the audience, Vance couldn't take his eyes off his son. "I've never seen him so." He struggled to find the words. "Alive," Faith suggested softly. Vance nodded, his eyes suspiciously bright. Mariah would be so proud of them. After the performance, as families gathered for the Thanksgiving feast in the town hall, Faith found herself surrounded by appreciative parents. She barely had time to eat before someone else wanted to discuss their child's progress or thank her for the performance. She was speaking with Mrs. Peterson about her daughter's reading when she noticed a commotion at the door. Turning, she saw Jeremiah, Vance's ranch hand, burst into the hall, his face pale with urgency. He scanned the crowd until he spotted Vance, then hurried to him. Faith excused herself and moved closer, a sense of foreboding growing as she saw Vance's expression darken. He immediately looked for his children who were playing with friends in the corner. "What is it?" Faith asked as she reached them. "What's happened?" "Sutter and his men," Vance said grimly. "They've burned my barn and stolen most of my remaining cattle." Jeremiah rode in as soon as he could. Faith gasped. "Was anyone hurt?" "Sarah was knocked down when she tried to stop them, but she's all right, shaken up." Vance's face was tight with controlled fury. "I need to get back." Marshal Davis was already approaching, having overheard. "I'll gather some men, we'll ride out with you." "The children," Vance began. "They can stay with me," Faith said without hesitation. "I'll keep them safe until you return." Gratitude flashed in Vance's eyes. "Thank you." He quickly explained to Elizabeth and Thomas that they would be staying with Miss Faith while he handled an emergency at the ranch. Elizabeth, perceptive as always, looked worried, but Thomas seemed excited at the prospect of visiting Faith's house. As Vance prepared to leave, he pulled Faith aside. "If I'm not back by morning, take them to Mrs. Peterson. She knows them well." "They'll be fine with me," Faith assured him. "Be careful, Vance." Their eyes held for a moment, so many unspoken words between them. Then Vance squeezed her hand once and was gone. Faith managed to keep the children's spirits up as they walked to her home, suggesting they could have a special sleepover with stories and hot chocolate. Inside, she built up the fire and made beds for them on the floor of her small sitting room, using quilts and pillows to create a cozy nest. "Is Papa going to catch the bad men?" Thomas asked as Faith tucked them in. "The marshal is with him and other good men from town," Faith said, choosing her words carefully. "They're going to do their best." "What if the bad men hurt Papa?" Elizabeth's voice was small but steady. Faith sat down beside her. "Your father is very brave and very smart. And he has people helping him." She stroked Elizabeth's hair. "Would you like to say a prayer for him?" Both children nodded. Faith bowed her head and began a simple prayer asking for protection for Vance and the others and for justice to be done. The children joined in with their amens, Thomas's voice unusually fervent. Despite their worry, the children eventually drifted off to sleep. Faith remained awake, moving between the window and the fire, watching for any sign of Vance's return. The hours stretched on, midnight coming and going with no word. Faith prayed continually, silently, her heart filled with fear for the man who had come to mean so much to her. Finally, exhausted, she dozed in her chair by the fire. she awoke at dawn to a soft knock at her door. Heart-pounding, she hurried to answer it, praying it wasn't bad news. Vance stood on her porch, his face smudged with soot, his clothes dirty but blessedly whole and unharmed. "Vance," the relief in her voice was palpable. "Are you all right? What happened?" "We caught up to Sutter and his men about 10 miles out," he said, his voice gravelly with exhaustion. "There was a fight. 2 of his men were wounded, but they got away. We managed to recover most of the cattle." He paused. "The barn's gone, though, and they poisoned my well." "Oh, Vance." Faith's heart sank. Without a well, the ranch couldn't function. "Come inside. The children are still sleeping." He followed her in, moving stiffly. Faith noticed him wince as he sat down. "You're hurt," she accused. "Just bruised. One of them got in a lucky punch." He tried to smile, but couldn't quite manage it. "Thank you for taking care of the children, of course." Faith hesitated. "What will you do now?" Vance ran a hand over his face. "I don't know. Without the well," he trailed off. "Wilson from the bank will have his excuse now. He's been looking for a reason to foreclose." "There must be something, Papa," Thomas's voice interrupted them. The boy launched himself at his father, wrapping his arms around Vance's neck. Elizabeth was right behind him, her eyes wide with relief. Vance hugged them both tightly, his eyes closing briefly as if in prayer. "I'm all right," he assured them. "Everything's going to be all right." But later, after Faith had made breakfast and the children were washing up, Vance admitted the truth. "I don't know how to fix this, Faith." The ranch was already struggling, now without water. "Could you dig a new well?" Faith asked. "It would take time and money, both of which I'm short on." He sighed. "I'm going to have to sell what's left of the herd and find work in town. Maybe the livery stable needs help." "And the children?" "They'll come with me, of course. We'll find a place in town." But the defeat in his voice was clear. He was losing the ranch, the home his wife had loved, the future he'd planned for his children. "Let me help," Faith said impulsively. "I have some savings." "No," Vance's response was firm. "I appreciate the offer, but I won't take your money, Faith. It wouldn't be, please." His voice softened. "You've already done more for us than I can ever repay, but this is something I need to handle myself." Faith understood his pride, but it frustrated her nonetheless. "At least let me help with the children while you make arrangements. They can stay with me after school until you're settled." This, at least, he accepted gratefully. The next few weeks were difficult for everyone. Vance sold most of his cattle at a fraction of their worth and took a job at the livery stable. He found a small house to rent in town, just 2 rooms, but clean and sound. The children tried to be brave about leaving their home, but Faith often caught them looking wistfully toward the mountains where their ranch lay. Christmas approached, bringing with it the school pageant and holiday preparations. Faith threw herself into making the season special for her students, particularly the McCoy children. She helped them make gifts for their father, a carved wooden pin for his shirt from Thomas, and a hand-stitched handkerchief from Elizabeth. On the last day of school before the holiday break, Faith presented each child with a small gift, a book for the older students, toys for the younger ones. For Elizabeth, she had found a beautiful illustrated copy of Little Women, and for Thomas, a set of carved wooden animals to add to his collection. "These are from Boston," she explained as Thomas examined the perfect detail of a tiny bear. "My aunt sent them when I wrote to her about you." Thomas looked up at her, his eyes wide. "You wrote to your aunt about me?" "Of course I did. I told her about all my special students." That evening, Vance came to collect the children from Faith's house, where they had been helping decorate a small Christmas tree. He brought with him the scent of snow and horses and a tentative smile. "The tree looks nice," he said, admiring their work. "Miss Faith says we can come back on Christmas Day to help her eat the gingerbread house we made," Elizabeth informed him. "Is that so?" Vance raised an eyebrow at Faith. She colored slightly. "I may have extended an invitation, but only if you don't have other plans." "No plans," he paused. "Except I was hoping to invite you to Christmas Eve supper with us. It's nothing fancy, but—" "I'd love to," Faith replied, perhaps too quickly. As the children gathered their things, Vance said quietly, "I have something to ask you, later." Curiosity piqued, Faith nodded. "I'll walk out with you." Outside, the snow was falling gently, turning Riverton into a scene from a Christmas card. The children ran ahead, trying to catch snowflakes on their tongues. "What did you want to ask me?" Faith prompted. Vance seemed suddenly nervous. "I've been offered a job, a good one. The Pemberton Ranch north of Cheyenne, they need a foreman. Faith's heart sank. That's wonderful. When would you start? After New Year's. He looked at her directly. It would mean leaving Riverton. The children will miss their friends and the school. She couldn't bring herself to say what she was really thinking. I'll miss you. Yes. Vance took a deep breath. That's actually what I wanted to ask you about. The Pembertons have a small school on their property for the ranch children. They need a teacher. Faith stared at him, not comprehending at first. It wouldn't be like your school here, he continued quickly. Just 8 or 9 children. But the pay is good and there's a nice house for the teacher, right near the foreman's house. Are you asking me to come with you? Faith whispered. I'm asking if you would consider it. His eyes were intent on hers. The children need you, Faith. They've flourished under your teaching, and I. He hesitated. I've come to depend on your friendship more than I should admit. Hope bloomed in Faith's chest, but caution tempered it. This is a lot to consider, Vance. My contract here, I know, and I'm not asking for an answer now. Just think about it. There was vulnerability in his expression that she'd never seen before. I will, she promised. I'll think about it. Christmas Eve arrived with clear skies and bitter cold. Faith spent the morning preparing gifts for the McCoys, a hand-knitted scarf for Vance in a deep blue that matched his eyes, and small sachets filled with lavender for the children to put in their drawers. As she dressed for supper at their home, she thought about Vance's offer. The idea of leaving Riverton after less than 6 months felt like abandoning her post. Yet the prospect of remaining close to the McCoys to Vance filled her with a warmth she couldn't deny. She had prayed for guidance every night since he'd made the offer, but clarity eluded her. Her heart said go, but her sense of duty held her back. The McCoys' small house was warm and inviting when she arrived, filled with the scent of roasting chicken and pine from the small tree they had decorated. The children greeted her with excitement, eager to show her the simple ornaments they had made for their tree. And look, Miss Faith, Papa hung stockings for us. Elizabeth pointed to 3 small stockings hung from a shelf, and one for you too, Thomas added, pointing to a 4th stocking. Faith looked questioningly at Vance, who shrugged with a small smile. The children insisted. Dinner was simple but delicious: roast chicken, potatoes, and carrots, with an apple pie that Vance admitted he'd purchased from Mrs. Peterson. Afterward, they sang carols around the small tree, the children's voices high and sweet in the cozy room. When it came time for bed, Elizabeth asked, "Will you say prayers with us, Miss Faith, like you did when we stayed at your house?" "Of course," Faith replied, following them to their small bedroom. The children knelt by their beds, hands clasped. Faith began with the traditional bedtime prayer, then paused, expecting the children to say their personal prayers as they usually did. To her surprise, Vance's deep voice joined in. "Lord, thank you for this Christmas Eve, for the food we shared, and for bringing Miss Faith into our lives. Watch over us through the night and help us to be worthy of your blessings. Amen." The children looked up at their father in astonishment, then at Faith, their faces shining with joy. Amen. They echoed with enthusiasm. Faith's eyes met Vance's over the children's heads, her heart too full for words. After the children were tucked in, Faith and Vance returned to the main room where the fire burned low in the small stove. "You prayed with them," Faith said softly. Vance nodded, looking slightly self-conscious. It felt right, for the first time in years. "What changed?" He looked at her directly, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "You did, or rather seeing the world through your eyes changed how I see things. You have this light about you, Faith. It touches everyone around you." Faith felt her cheeks warm. "I don't know about that." "I do." Vance moved closer to her. "These past months, watching you with my children, seeing how you approach life with such hope and certainty, it's made me question my own bitterness. Made me wonder if perhaps I've been looking at everything wrong." "How so?" "I've been so angry at God for taking Mariah. I couldn't see the blessings still in my life, my children, this community, the chance to build something new." He paused. "You," Faith's breath caught. "Vance, let me finish, please." He took her hands in his. "I'm not good with words, Faith, but I need to say this. I've fallen in love with you, probably from that first day at the bank, though I was too broken to recognize it then. You've brought light back into our lives, and I can't imagine a future without you in it." Joy surged through Faith, so intense it brought tears to her eyes. "I love you too," she whispered. "So much it frightens me sometimes." Vance's hands tightened on hers. "Then come with us." teach at the Pemberton School, be part of our family." "Are you asking me to marry you, Vance McCoy?" Faith asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I am, not very romantically, I'm afraid." A smile touched his lips. "I should probably get down on one knee." "No," Faith said quickly. "This is perfect, just as it is." "Is that a yes?" Faith took a deep breath. "It's a yes to loving you and the children. It's a yes to wanting to build a life with you." She hesitated. "But my contract here, we can wait," Vance said immediately. "I'll talk to Pemberton, explain the situation. If the position's right for you, he'll hold it." Faith nodded, relief and happiness washing through her. "Then yes, Vance McCoy, I will marry you." He pulled her into his arms then, his kiss gentle at first, then deepening with a passion that took her breath away. When they finally parted, they were both breathless. "I should go," Faith said reluctantly. "It's getting late." Vance nodded, though he seemed equally reluctant to let her leave. "Will you come for Christmas dinner tomorrow? The children would be devastated if you didn't." "I wouldn't miss it for the world." He walked her to the door, helping her with her coat. Before she stepped out into the cold night, he kissed her once more. "Merry Christmas, Faith. Merry Christmas, Vance." Walking home through the quiet, snow-covered streets, Faith felt a joy so complete it seemed to illuminate her from within. She had come to Riverton seeking adventure and purpose. She had found love, family, and a faith renewed through sharing it with others. Christmas Day dawned bright and clear. Faith attended the morning church service, her heart so full of gratitude she could barely contain it. Several townspeople commented on her radiance, though she kept her engagement private for now, wanting to share the news with the children first. When she arrived at the McCoys' home for dinner, she was greeted by excited children and the surprising sight of a decorated table set with what appeared to be Mariah's good china. "Papa said it was time to use Mama's special dishes again," Elizabeth explained, "because today is special." "Very special," Vance agreed, his eyes meeting Faith's with a warmth that made her blush. After dinner, as they sat by the fire, Vance cleared his throat. "Elizabeth, Thomas, Miss Faith and I have something to tell you." The children looked up expectantly. "I've asked Miss Faith to marry me," Vance said, his voice gentle but firm, "to become part of our family, and she said yes." There was a moment of silence as the children absorbed this news. Then Thomas asked, "Does that mean you'll be our mama now?" Faith's heart constricted. "I could never replace your mother, Thomas, but I would be honored to be your stepmother, to love you and care for you alongside your father." Elizabeth's brow furrowed in thought. "Would we still call you Miss Faith?" Faith smiled. "You could call me whatever feels right to you, I think." Elizabeth looked at her father, then back at Faith. "I think I'd like to call you Mama Faith, because Mama would want us to have a mama again, but we don't want to forget her." "Mama Faith," Thomas repeated, testing the words. "I like that." Faith felt tears welling in her eyes. "I would be honored. And there's more news," Vance continued. "We're going to be moving to a new ranch after the school year ends. I'll be working as the foreman, and Mama Faith will be teaching at the ranch school." "Will there be horses?" Thomas asked immediately. "Lots of horses," Vance assured him, "and cattle and mountains to explore. Will we have our own house?" Elizabeth wanted to know. "We will. A nice one with rooms for everyone and a big yard." The children peppered them with questions about the new ranch, their excitement growing with each answer. Finally, Elizabeth asked the question Faith had been expecting. "But what about our old ranch, the one Mama loved?" Vance's expression sobered. "Sometimes we have to leave places behind, Lizzie, but we take the memories with us. And maybe someday when you and Thomas are grown, you might want to come back and see if you can rebuild it." Elizabeth considered this, then nodded solemnly. "I think I'd like that." After the children had gone to bed, Vance and Faith sat close together on the small sofa, his arm around her shoulders. "They took it well," Faith observed, "better than I'd hoped." Vance pressed a kiss to her temple. "They love you, you know, almost as much as I do. I love them too, so much." She nestled closer to him. "I never imagined when I came to Riverton that I'd find a family here, and I never imagined I'd find love again." His voice grew thoughtful. "That night when you stayed with the children during the raid, Elizabeth told me you prayed beside their beds." Faith nodded. "They were frightened for you." Elizabeth said it reminded her of how Mariah used to pray with them. Vance's voice thickened slightly. "That was the moment, I think, when I realized how much they needed you, how much I needed you." "Sometimes prayer answers needs we don't even know we have," Faith said softly. I'm beginning to believe that. The winter passed swiftly. Faith continued teaching at the Riverton school while Vance worked at the livery stable and made preparations for their move. Their engagement was announced in church the Sunday after Christmas, to the delight of most of the community. A few raised eyebrows at the relatively brief courtship, but those who had seen them together understood. Wilson from the bank, to Vance's surprise, offered to buy the McCoy ranch land. "It's good property," he admitted. "Just needs a new well. I've got investors interested in expanding cattle operations in the territory." The sale gave Vance enough money to clear his debts and set aside a small sum for the children's future. It felt like closing a chapter of his life, but not with the bitterness he had once anticipated. The wedding was set for the last week of May, after the school year ended and before their move to the Pemberton Ranch. Faith wrote to her aunt in Boston, who promised to make the journey west for the ceremony. The news that they would be leaving Riverton brought mixed reactions from Faith students and their parents, but most understood the opportunity it represented. As winter gave way to spring, Sutter and his gang were finally apprehended by territorial marshals after a bank robbery in Cheyenne. The news brought a sense of closure for Vance, who had worried about leaving his children vulnerable to Sutter's vendetta. "It feels like everything is falling into place," he told Faith one evening in April as they walked by the creek that ran through town. The cottonwoods were budding, and the air held the promise of warmer days. "As if we were meant to find each other," Faith agreed, her hand in his. "Do you think that's true, that God had a plan for us all along?" There was genuine curiosity in his voice, not the bitterness that had once colored his questions about faith. Faith considered her answer carefully. "I believe he puts people in our paths when we need them most. Whether we recognize that gift is up to us." Vance nodded slowly. "I almost didn't. I was so lost in my grief, I nearly missed the blessing right in front of me. But you didn't miss it." She squeezed his hand. "You opened your heart again despite the pain. That takes courage, Vance." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "You make me brave, Faith Blackburn, brave enough to love again, brave enough to believe again." The kiss they shared was sweet with promise and the certainty of a future together. May arrived with wildflowers and preparations for the wedding. Faith's Aunt Margaret arrived from Boston, a dignified lady who quickly won over the McCoy children with her stories of Faith's childhood adventures and the sweets she had brought from the East. "You found a good man," she told Faith the night before the wedding as they sat in Faith's small house. "I see the way he looks at you like you're the sunrise after a long, dark night." "I feel the same way about him," Faith admitted. "Is it strange that I'm not nervous at all, just certain?" Aunt Margaret smiled. "Not strange, it's faith, my dear, the certainty of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen." The wedding day dawned clear and mild. The entire town seemed to turn out for the ceremony at the small church, which had been decorated with spring flowers by Faith students. Elizabeth served as flower girl, her face solemn with the importance of her role. While Thomas proudly carried the rings on a small cushion Elizabeth had embroidered. Vance waited at the altar, looking more handsome than Faith had ever seen him in a new black suit, his face alight with joy as she walked toward him on Marshall Davis's arm. Faith wore a simple dress of ivory silk sent by her aunt as a wedding gift, her hair adorned with a crown of wildflowers gathered by her students. The vows they exchanged were traditional, but the emotion behind them was profound. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was both tender and filled with promise, drawing happy sighs from the congregation. The celebration afterwards spilled out of the church and into the town square, with tables of food prepared by the women of Riverton and music provided by local musicians. As Vance led Faith in their first dance as husband and wife, she caught sight of Elizabeth and Thomas watching them, their faces shining with happiness. "Look at them," she whispered to Vance. "They're glowing." Vance followed her gaze, his expression softening. "They have their mother's heart. And now they have you to help them grow." Later, as the celebration continued, Aunt Margaret approached them. "I have a wedding gift for you both," she said, handing Vance an envelope. Inside was a bank draft for a considerable sum. Vance looked up in astonishment. "Mrs. Winters, this is too generous. It's for the children," Aunt Margaret said firmly. For their education or whatever dreams they pursue, Faith's parents left this money for her, but she insists she doesn't need it. So now it belongs to her children. Faith saw the emotion in Vance's eyes at the words "her children." "Thank you," he said, his voice rough. "We'll make sure it's used well." The sun was setting when they finally left the celebration, boarding a rented carriage that would take them to a small cabin in the mountains for a brief honeymoon before their move to the Pemberton Ranch. The children would stay with Aunt Margaret, who had decided to remain in Riverton for several weeks before returning to Boston. As they drove away amidst cheers and well wishes, Faith nestled against her husband's side, a profound sense of contentment washing over her. "Happy, Mrs. McCoy?" Vance asked, his arm tightening around her, completely. She smiled up at him. "And you, more than I thought possible." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "I never thought I'd find this kind of happiness again. You've given me back my life, Faith, my soul." "We've given each other a new beginning," she corrected gently. "And our children a family whole again." As the carriage climbed into the mountains, the stars began to appear overhead, countless points of light in the vast Wyoming sky. Faith thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment, from Boston to Riverton, from a lonely schoolteacher to a wife and mother. It hadn't been the adventure she'd expected, but it was infinitely more precious. "What are you thinking about?" Vance asked, watching her face in the fading light. "About how sometimes the greatest adventures aren't the ones we plan, but the ones that find us when we're busy making other plans." Vance chuckled. "That sounds like something you'd teach your students." "Perhaps I will at our new school." Faith leaned her head against his shoulder. "I have a feeling the Pemberton Ranch is going to be the start of a wonderful new chapter for all of us." "The first of many," Vance promised, sealing his words with a kiss as the carriage continued its journey into their future. 5 years later, the McCoy family gathered on the porch of their comfortable home on the Pemberton Ranch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Vance, now the ranch manager after old Mr. Pemberton's retirement, had his arm around Faith's shoulders. Elizabeth, 12 now and growing into a thoughtful young woman with her mother's artistic talent, sat reading to 3-year-old Joseph, the son born to Faith and Vance in their second year of marriage. Thomas, 10 and already showing remarkable skill with horses, was helping 2-year-old Rebecca toddle up the porch steps, his patience with his half-sister touching to watch. "Careful, Becky," he cautioned as she navigated the last step. "That's it, good job." Rebecca beamed with accomplishment and ran to Faith, who scooped her up with a laugh. "Mama, I did it." "You certainly did, my brave girl." Faith kissed her daughter's rosy cheek, then looked up at Vance with a smile that held a secret. He raised an eyebrow questioningly. "Later," she murmured, her eyes promising news she wanted to share privately. After the younger children were in bed, and Elizabeth and Thomas had retreated to their rooms, Elizabeth to write in her journal, Thomas to work on a wooden horse he was carving, Faith and Vance sat together on the porch swing, enjoying the peaceful evening. "So," Vance said, taking her hand. "What's this secret you've been keeping all day?" Faith's smile was radiant. "We're going to have another baby in the winter." Joy spread across Vance's face. "Really? You're certain?" She nodded. "I saw Dr. Michaels when I was in town yesterday. He confirmed it." Vance pulled her close, kissing her with tender passion. "I love you, Faith McCoy, more each day, and I love you." She rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Are you happy, Vance? Truly happy? Happier than I ever dreamed possible." He looked out at the ranch that had become their home, at the schoolhouse where Faith taught not only their children but a dozen others from neighboring ranches, at the land that had given them a fresh start. "Sometimes I can't believe this is my life. That I get to wake up beside you every morning to see our children grow to feel at peace. Do you ever regret leaving Riverton, the ranch that was yours?" Vance considered the question seriously. "No, that ranch was part of a different life. This is where we belong now." He smiled slightly. "Although Elizabeth still talks about going back someday, seeing if she can rebuild it. She has Mariah's determination," Faith observed, "and your strength, and your compassion." Vance stroked her hair thoughtfully. "Do you know what I remember most clearly from those early days? The night you prayed beside the children's beds when Sutter's gang attacked the ranch. I came home exhausted, angry, feeling like everything was slipping through my fingers. And there you were, kneeling beside my children, your face so serene, so certain that God was listening. Faith remembered it well. I was terrified for you that night, but you didn't let the children see your fear, you gave them faith instead. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. That's when I knew, even if I couldn't admit it yet, that's when my heart started to heal. God works in unexpected ways, Faith said softly. Indeed he does. Vance placed his hand gently over Faith's abdomen where their fourth child grew. A schoolteacher from Boston, a widowed rancher who'd lost his way, and the perfect timing that brought them together. If that's not divine intervention, I don't know what is. As twilight deepened into night, they remained on the porch, talking quietly about the future, about their hopes for their children, about the life they had built together. And when they finally went inside, Faith paused in the doorway of the children's rooms, watching them sleep peacefully, and offered a silent prayer of thanksgiving for the family that had become hers. Vance found her there, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Coming to bed, Mrs. McCoy." "In a moment," she leaned back against him. "I was just thinking about how blessed we are indeed." His voice was husky with emotion. "Thank you for teaching me to believe that again." Faith turned in his arms, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "Thank you for showing me what love truly means." Hand in hand, they walked to their bedroom, their hearts full with the present and hopeful for the future. Two souls that had found their way home in each other.